The desert sun fell like liquid fire on the cracked earth. Wyatt Martinez wiped the sweat from his brow as he repaired the fence on his ranch. He had been living alone on this forgotten land for 3 years, a 5-day journey from the nearest town. The silence of the desert was absolute. That's why when he heard soft footsteps behind him, his hand instinctively flew to his belt. He spun around quickly, his heart racing. 3 Apache women stood before him. Young, thin, wearing dusty clothes, their faces marked by extreme exhaustion. They carried no weapons. Their dark eyes watched him with a mixture of hope and fear. The one in front slowly raised her hand and pointed toward the water well. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. Wyatt recognized desperation when he saw it. His mind worked quickly. The Apache didn't come down from the mountains without reason. The stories that circulated in town always ended badly, but these women didn't look dangerous. They looked lost. Wyatt looked at the well, then at the women, then back at the well. Water was scarce, but not so scarce that he could refuse them. He nodded. The 3 women walked toward the well with careful steps, as if expecting Wyatt to change his mind at any moment. They knelt by the bucket, drinking eagerly but without wasting a single drop. When they finished, the one in front gave a small bow of her head and pointed to something on the ground. Wyatt looked. They had left a small woven object, a bracelet made of natural fibers decorated with beads. A gift, payment for the water. Before he could say anything, the 3 women disappeared among the desert rocks as silently as they had arrived. Wyatt picked up the bracelet and examined it. The work was extraordinary, every knot perfect, every bead placed with precision. He put the object in his pocket and returned to his work, but his mind stayed with those 3 strangers. Who were they? Where did they come from? Why were they traveling alone through the desert without protection? The afternoon passed without further surprises. Wyatt fed his horses, checked on the cattle, and finished repairing the fence as the sun began to set. The desert was painted in oranges and reds as he finally walked toward the barn, but something was different. He stopped dead. The barn door was slightly open. He always closed it, always. His hand went to his belt again. He pushed the door open carefully, ready for anything. The barn was clean, cleaner than it had been in months. The hay was arranged in perfect piles. The horse tack hung on pegs he had forgotten existed. The floor had been swept, and his 3 horses were brushed until they shone, with fresh hay distributed evenly in their feed troughs. Wyatt felt a shiver run down his spine. The 3 women had returned without him seeing or hearing them. They had worked in total silence and left again. Why? He went out of the barn and scanned the horizon. Nothing. Just the long shadows of dusk on the empty land. He rubbed his face, confused. In 3 years of solitude, he had learned to trust his senses, but these women moved like ghosts. He walked around his property looking for signs, footprints in the dirt, some clue as to where they had come in or gone out, but the hard desert floor revealed nothing. Night fell quickly, as it always does in the desert. Wyatt prepared his simple dinner, ate in silence, and lay down in his bed in the barn. He lived there because it was cooler than the main house, which needed too many repairs he never had time to make. Just as sleep was beginning to take him, he heard something, footsteps, soft but multiple, many. He sat up with a jolt, fully awake. He walked to the barn window and looked outside. His breath stopped. On the distant horizon, barely visible in the darkness, there were lights, not 1 or 2, but many. Small, flickering points moving slowly across the nighttime desert. Campfires, camps. People, and they were coming toward his ranch. Wyatt felt his heart pounding against his ribs. How many people could there be? 10, 20 more. The 3 women from the morning hadn't been casual visitors. They had been scouts, messengers, and now someone else was coming. Wyatt stayed awake the entire night, watching the lights on the horizon. Sometimes they seemed to get closer, other times they remained still. He made strong coffee and sat by the window with his gun nearby, but without touching it. He didn't want trouble, but he wasn't foolish either. The hours dragged by. The cold of the desert night seeped into his bones. The stars shone with impossible brightness in the black sky, and those distant lights remained there like eyes watching him from the darkness. Dawn arrived, painting the sky in impossible colors. Wyatt went out of the barn, tired but alert. He walked to the front of his property, preparing himself for whatever was about to come, and then he saw them. His jaw dropped. Walking in an orderly line down the dusty path toward his ranch were 25 Apache women. 25, all young, all walking with silent determination, and at the front he recognized the 3 from yesterday. They stopped 20 paces from him. No one spoke. The silence of the desert felt heavier than ever. Wyatt opened his mouth, but no words came out. What was happening? One of the women in front, the same one who had pointed to the well yesterday, stepped forward. Her eyes met Wyatt's, and in that moment he knew his life was about to change forever. Wyatt stood motionless, his heart hammering in his chest. 25 pairs of eyes watched him in silence. The desert wind lifted small clouds of dust between them, but no one moved. The woman who had led the group of 3 the day before took another step forward. She was young, maybe 25, with hair black as night and a posture that radiated dignity despite the obvious exhaustion on her face. Behind her, another woman stepped forward. She was smaller, with intelligent eyes that scanned the entire ranch quickly. When she spoke, her voice was clear and her English perfect. "My name is Chenoa. This is Nayland, our leader." The woman paused, choosing her words carefully. We come in peace, we carry no weapons, we are not looking for trouble. Wyatt found his voice, though it sounded hoarse. There are many of you, we are 25, Chenoa confirmed. Yesterday, 3 of us came to ask for water. You gave it to us without asking for anything in return. That is rare in this world. Wyatt looked at the women one by one. All of them looked exhausted, with torn, dusty clothes. Some had their feet wrapped in rags because their shoes had disintegrated, but all of them held their heads high. Where do you come from? Wyatt asked. Chenoa exchanged a glance with Nayland before answering. Our tribe wanted to marry us off to old men, warriors who had lost their wives and needed new ones. They didn't ask us if we wanted to, they simply decided. The silence that followed was heavy. Wyatt felt something tighten in his chest. So you escaped, he said in a low voice. We escaped, Chenoa confirmed. For 3 weeks we have walked through the desert, some nights without water, many nights without food, but we would rather die free than live as someone else's property. Nayland spoke then in her own language. Chenoa translated. Yesterday you gave water to 3 strangers. You didn't have to. You could have refused us, you could have threatened us, but you gave us what we needed without hesitation. That's why we came back last night and cleaned your barn. That's why we are here now. Wyatt frowned. What is it you want? We want to repay our debt, Chenoa replied. In our culture, when someone saves your life, you owe them work, you owe them loyalty. We saw your ranch yesterday. It is in need. Broken fences, the house unrepaired, the garden dead. A man alone cannot maintain all of this. We can help, Chenoa continued. We are good workers. We know the desert better than anyone. We know how to make plants grow where others only see dead earth. We know how to repair, build, weave. Let us work for you for a season, then we will leave and we will be at peace. Wyatt rubbed his face with both hands. This was madness. 25 Apache women on his ranch. The nearest town was 5 days away, but news traveled. What would people say? What trouble would this bring? But when he looked at those women again, he saw something he recognized. Desperation, hope. The same feeling he had had 3 years ago when he came to this place looking for a new beginning. How long? He asked finally. Chenoa consulted with Nayland in a low voice. As long as it takes to pay our debt, a month, maybe 2. We will work hard, we will not cause trouble, and then we will disappear. Wyatt looked around his property, the fences that needed urgent repair. The garden he had tried to cultivate for 2 years without success. The house falling apart because he never had time to fix it. The barn that was too big for one man alone. Where would you sleep? He asked. In the barn, Chenoa answered immediately. We saw that you live there. It is big. There's enough space. We will not bother you. The barn is mine, Wyatt said firmly. For a moment, disappointment crossed the women's faces, but then Wyatt continued. You can stay in it. I will move into the house. It's about time I repaired it anyway. A murmur of surprise ran through the group. Nayland spoke again, and Chenoa translated with a smile. She says you are a strange man, but a good one. Wyatt almost smiled. I'm probably crazy, but you're right. I can't keep this place alone. If you want to work, then work, but there are rules. We're listening, Chenoa said. First rule, no one enters my house without permission. Second rule, the water from the well is shared, but it is used carefully. Third rule, if anyone comes from town asking questions, you didn't cause any problems. You're here because I hired you. Understood, Chenoa translated quickly. The 25 women nodded in unison. Then I guess you have work, Wyatt said. The barn is yours. There are blankets in the house that I can bring over. And welcome, I suppose. He hadn't finished speaking when the women dispersed like water. Organized themselves without needing words, dividing into groups that headed to different parts of the ranch. Some went to the fences, others to the garden. A group began inspecting the barn from the outside. Wyatt stood in the middle of the organized chaos, feeling completely lost on his own property. Chenoa approached him. Thank you, she said simply. You don't know what this means to us. I hope I don't regret it, Wyatt muttered, watching as the women worked with an efficiency he had never seen. 10 women had gone to the broken fences on the east side. They worked in perfect sync, some holding posts while others tied the wire with precise movements. They didn't speak but seemed to communicate with simple gestures and glances. Another group of 8 women had surrounded the dead garden. They knelt in the dry earth, touching it with their hands, examining it as if it could speak to them. One of them took seeds from a small pouch tied to her waist. Another began digging small channels with her bare hands. The remaining 7 cleaned the barn from the inside. Wyatt could hear the sound of improvised brooms sweeping the old hay. Soft voices sang something in their language, a melody that floated in the hot desert air. By midday, the ranch had changed. The east fences were repaired. The garden had neat rows of turned soil, ready for planting. The barn was clean and organized. Wyatt watched it all from the shade of his house with a cup of coffee in his hand, wondering if he was dreaming. Nayland approached him with Chenoa translating at her side. She asks if you have more tools, hammers, nails, wood. In the shed, Wyatt answered, pointing to a small structure behind the house, but it's all old and rusty. Chenoa translated. Nayland nodded and walked to the shed. Minutes later, 3 women came out carrying tools Wyatt had forgotten he owned. The sun was beginning to set when they finally stopped. The women gathered by the well, drinking water carefully, not wasting a single drop. Then they went to the barn and disappeared inside. Wyatt entered his house for the first time in months. It was dusty, with cobwebs in the corners and furniture covered with old sheets. He sighed. Tomorrow he would start cleaning it. That night, as he tried to sleep on a mattress that creaked with every movement, he heard soft voices from the barn, low laughter, the sound of women who could finally rest without fear. And for the first time in 3 years, Wyatt didn't feel completely alone on his land. A week had passed. Wyatt woke early as always, but this time the ranch was already alive with activity. The Apache women rose before dawn, working in silence while the stars still shone in the sky. The change was remarkable. The fences were completely repaired. The garden showed the first green sprouts of life. The barn looked like new, with improvised curtains the women had woven to create private spaces inside. But Wyatt needed supplies. The well water was abundant, but food was scarce. 26 mouths were many more than one. I have to go to town, he told Chenoa that morning. We need flour, beans, salt, basic things. Chenoa translated for Nayland, who nodded with understanding. How long will you be gone? 3 days there, 3 days back, maybe 1 day in town. Wyatt paused. Will you be all right here alone? Nayland spoke, and Chenoa smiled as she translated. She says we survived 3 weeks in the desert with nothing. A few days on a ranch with water and a roof will be a rest. Wyatt prepared his horse and a mule to carry the supplies. Before leaving, he called Chenoa. If anyone comes, anyone, tell them I hired you, that you're ranch workers, nothing more. Understood, Chenoa replied. The trip to town was long and hot. Wyatt used the time to think about what he would say if anyone asked. The truth was complicated. 25 Apache women escaping forced marriages sounded like the kind of story that would cause trouble. When he arrived at the town of Dry Creek on the third day, the sun was at its highest point. The place was small and dusty, with one main street and wooden buildings weathered by the desert wind. Wyatt tied his horse in front of the general store. The owner, a man named Samuel with a prominent belly and gray mustache, greeted him from behind the counter. Wyatt, we haven't seen you in months. Thought the desert had swallowed you up. Still alive, Wyatt replied, handing him a list. I need all of this, double the usual amount. Samuel raised his eyebrows as he read, double, you have visitors. Wyatt kept his expression neutral. I hired help. The ranch is too big for one man. Help. Samuel leaned over the counter with curiosity. Who's crazy enough to move 5 days from town? People who need work, Wyatt answered simply. Can you get this or not? As Samuel prepared the order, other men entered the store. Wyatt recognized some of them: Tom Harris, owner of a ranch to the north, Bill Morrison, the blacksmith, and Jack Cooper, who always seemed to be where he wasn't called. Heard you hired help, Tom said directly. How many? Enough to keep the place running, Wyatt replied, avoiding the number. Where did you get workers? Jack insisted. We're all looking for extra hands around here, and there's no one available. I got lucky, Wyatt said, loading the first sacks onto his mule. Bill, the blacksmith, crossed his arms. Look, Wyatt, we don't want to meddle in your business, but the desert is dangerous. If you brought in outsiders, the town has a right to know who they are. Wyatt stopped and looked at them directly. They're workers, honest, they don't cause trouble, they work hard, and that's all I need. But who are they? Jack pressed. People who needed a new beginning, Wyatt answered firmly. Like me when I came here 3 years ago, like half the people in this town. Tom Harris nodded slowly. That's fair, but understand our concern, Wyatt. Water is scarce in these lands. Your ranch has the only large well for miles around. If there are more people using that water. Ah, there was the real problem. The well is fine, Wyatt said. It has enough water for everyone. I'm not taking anything from anyone. For now, Jack muttered. But what if the summer is drier than usual? What if your people use up all the water? Samuel intervened from the counter. Jack has a point, Wyatt. We all depend on the same underground water sources. If your well dries up, the others might too. Wyatt felt frustration growing in his chest. I've lived there for 3 years. The well has never dropped more than 2 feet, not even in the worst summer. There's enough water. For how many people? Tom asked. That's the real question. How many workers did you hire? Silence spread through the store. Everyone waited for his answer. Enough, Wyatt repeated. And the water is fine. If you're so worried, you can come check it yourselves. Maybe we will, Jack said with a challenging tone. Bill the blacksmith raised a hand. Easy, everyone. Wyatt is a good man. If he says there's no problem with the water, I believe him. He looked at Wyatt. But you understand why we're nervous, right? This town depends on the water. Families depend on the water. I understand, Wyatt said. And I promise I'm not putting anyone's resources at risk. My ranch supports itself. Samuel finished packing the supplies. That'll be $40, Wyatt. By the way, this is a lot of food, more than 2 or 3 workers would need. Wyatt paid without commenting, loaded the rest of the supplies onto his mule, and prepared to leave. Before he went, Tom Harris approached him. Wyatt, one more thing. The sheriff asked about you last week. He wanted to know if you'd seen any strange groups moving through the desert. Wyatt's heart jumped, but he kept his expression calm. The sheriff, why? Apparently there are reports of Apache women who escaped from their tribe up north. The tribal chief is looking for them. Tom looked him directly in the eyes. Have you seen anything? Wyatt held his gaze. The desert is big. I see coyotes, snakes, and occasionally an eagle, nothing else. Tom nodded slowly. All right, just wanted you to know. If you see anything strange, the sheriff wants you to let him know. I'll keep that in mind, Wyatt said, mounting his horse. As he left town, he felt multiple pairs of eyes following him. Tom's words echoed in his head. The sheriff was looking for the women. The tribe was looking for them. and now the town suspected something strange was happening on his ranch. The return trip was tense. Wyatt kept his eyes on the horizon, looking for any sign of followers. He camped without a fire the first 2 nights, sleeping with one eye open. When he finally saw his ranch in the distance on the third day, he felt a relief he hadn't expected, but also a new worry. How long could they keep the secret, and what would happen when the truth finally came to light? Wyatt arrived at the ranch at sunset on the third day. The women greeted him with visible relief on their faces. Chenoa ran to him as he dismounted. "We were worried. We thought maybe you'd had trouble." "The town is nervous," Wyatt said, unloading the supplies. "They're asking about the water, and the sheriff is looking for Apache women who escaped from their tribe." Chenoa's face paled. She quickly translated for Nayland, who had appeared behind her. The leader listened in silence, her expression turning serious. "What did you tell them?" Chenoa asked. "That I hired workers, nothing more, but they're not stupid. They know something is going on." Wyatt looked at the women gathered around. "You need to be careful. If anyone comes from town, let me do the talking." That night, after the supplies were stored and distributed, Wyatt sat on the porch of his house. The night breeze was cool, a relief from the brutal heat of the day. He watched the barn where faint lights flickered in the windows. Soft voices sang in the Apache language. For a moment, everything seemed peaceful, almost normal. Then Nayland came out of the barn and walked directly toward him. Chenoa came behind her, ready to translate. "She wants to talk to you," Chenoa said. Wyatt nodded, gesturing to the porch steps. The two women sat down. Nayland spoke for a long time. Her words were fluid and charged with emotion. Chenoa translated in pauses. "She says she understands the risk you're taking for us, that it's not your problem, not your responsibility, but you did it anyway." Chenoa paused as Nayland continued. "She says that if we cause too much trouble, we will leave. We don't want to destroy your life." Wyatt looked toward the dark horizon. "Where would you go?" "We don't know," Chenoa admitted. "Further west, maybe, or south to Mexico, anywhere we can start over." "The desert will kill you," Wyatt said simply. "You were lucky to get here alive. You wouldn't survive another long journey without water or supplies." "Then what do you suggest?" Chenoa asked. Wyatt was silent for a moment. "You stay, but we need a plan. If the sheriff comes, if the tribe comes, we need a story that works." Nayland spoke again, and Chenoa translated with a small smile. "She says you are smarter than you look." Despite the tension, Wyatt almost smiled. "Tell her she is too." They spent the next hour discussing strategies. If anyone asked, the women were hired workers from a distant town. They wouldn't speak Apache in public. They would stay on the property as much as possible. It was a weak plan, but it was all they had. 3 days later, the plan was put to the test. Wyatt was repairing the roof of the house when he saw dust on the horizon. Riders, several of them, coming directly toward the ranch. "Chenoa," he shouted. "Visitors." The response was immediate. The women disappeared inside the barn like ghosts. In seconds, the ranch looked deserted except for Wyatt. 5 riders approached. They weren't from town. Their clothes and the way they rode revealed something different. When they got closer, Wyatt felt his stomach tighten. They were Apache warriors. Young men with painted faces and visible weapons. They stopped 20 paces away. The leader, a tall man with a scar crossing his left cheek, spoke in English with a heavy accent. "We look for women, 25 from our tribe. Have you seen them?" Wyatt climbed down from the roof slowly, keeping his hands visible. "This is a private ranch. Who are you?" "I am Kurok," the leader replied. "These women stole property from our tribe. They ran from their promises. They are in debt to their future husbands." "I haven't seen anyone," Wyatt said firmly. "I live here alone." Kurok looked around the ranch. His eyes stopped on the repaired fences, the flourishing garden, the clean barn. "Your ranch looks very well cared for a man alone." "I work hard." "Impossible," Kurok said, dismounting. The other 4 warriors followed him. "This work requires many hands. Where are your workers?" "I don't have workers." Kurok walked toward the barn. "Then you won't mind if we check?" Wyatt stepped forward to block his path. "Yes, I do mind. This is my property. You have no right." The 5 warriors tensed. Hands went to knives. The situation was about to explode. Then the barn door opened. Nayland walked out with her head high. Behind her, one by one, the 25 women emerged. They formed a line behind their leader, no visible fear on their faces. Kurok smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. "There they are. I knew they were here." Nayland spoke in her language. Quick, strong words, Kurok responded with equal intensity. The exchange lasted several minutes, voices rising. Finally, Chenoa stepped forward and translated for Wyatt. "Kurok says we must return, that we belong to the tribe, that the men waiting for us paid a bride price." "And what did Nayland say?" Wyatt asked. "That we are not property, that we refuse those marriages, that we choose our own path." Kurok spoke directly to Wyatt. "These women are troublesome. They will bring you suffering. It is better that you hand them over now." "No," Wyatt said simply. The warriors looked at each other in surprise. Kurok narrowed his eyes. "What did you say?" "I said no. They are here by their own will. I'm not handing them over." "It is not your decision," Kurok growled. "On my land it is." Kurok stepped forward, his hand on his knife. "You are 1 man, we are 5, and they have no weapons. How do you plan to stop us?" Wyatt didn't back down. "You can try. But it won't end well for anyone." The tension was so thick it could be cut. No one moved, no one breathed. Then Nayland spoke again, calmer this time. Kurok listened, his expression slowly changing from anger to something more complex. When she finished, Kurok was silent for a long time. Finally he spoke, and Chenoa translated. Nayland reminded him of the old ways. Before the white men came, before everything changed, Apache women had a voice. They could refuse marriages. They could choose their destiny. Genoa paused. She asked him when they became like the white men who oppressed them. Kuruk looked at the 25 women, then at Wyatt, then back at Nayland. He spoke slowly. If they are here by choice, Genoa translated, and if this man does not force them, then we cannot take them. But if someday they want to return, the tribe will accept them, and if this man mistreats them, we will return. Wyatt nodded. Understood. Kuruk mounted his horse. Before leaving, he looked at Wyatt one last time. Take good care of them, white man, or we will find you again. The 5 warriors rode away, their silhouettes disappearing into the desert. When they were gone, Wyatt felt his legs almost give way. He sat down heavily on the porch floor. The women slowly approached. Nayland knelt in front of him and put a hand on his shoulder. She spoke softly. She says thank you, Genoa translated with tears in her eyes. She says you are a warrior without need of weapons. Wyatt looked at the 25 women gathered around. We're a team now, we protect each other. For the first time since they arrived, all the women smiled. 2 months had passed since the confrontation with the warriors. The ranch had changed in ways Wyatt never could have imagined. The garden flourished with vegetables growing in perfect rows, bright red tomatoes, fat pumpkins, green chilies, beans climbing up vertical poles. The women had used ancient desert techniques, creating irrigation systems that used every drop of water with maximum efficiency. The fences were completely repaired and reinforced. The barn was not only clean but transformed into a livable space with cloth dividers, small storage areas, and even woven decorations hanging from the rafters. But the most significant change was something else. The women had begun to weave blankets, mats, bags decorated with traditional Apache patterns. The work was extraordinary, every piece unique, every design telling a story. Wyatt had taken some pieces to town on his last trip. The reaction was immediate. "Where did you get this?" the sheriff's wife had asked, holding a blanket with shining eyes. "It's beautiful. How much do you want for it?" Wyatt had improvised a price, thinking it was too high. The woman paid without haggling and asked if there was more. Now, on this cool morning, Wyatt was preparing for another trip to town. But this time he was carrying 20 woven pieces, carefully packed on the back of his wagon. Genoa approached as he loaded the last box. "Are you sure they will sell?" "I sold 5 pieces in less than an hour last time," Wyatt replied. "The people in town have never seen work like this. They love it." Nayland appeared with a small bundle wrapped in cloth. She handed it to Wyatt with soft words that Genoa translated. "It is for you, a gift for everything you have done." Wyatt unwrapped the cloth and found a woven bracelet, similar to the one the first 3 women had left for him months ago, but more elaborate. It had blue and white beads forming a pattern that seemed to represent mountains under a clear sky. "It's beautiful," Wyatt said, putting it on his wrist. "Thank you." The trip to town was peaceful. Wyatt arrived at midday and parked his wagon in front of the general store. Samuel came out immediately. "Wyatt, did you bring more of those blankets?" 20 pieces, Wyatt replied, beginning to unload. In less than 30 minutes, a crowd had formed. The town's women examined the blankets and mats, exclaiming over the colors and patterns. The prices Wyatt asked for were high, but no one haggled. By dinner time, he had sold 18 pieces. Only 2 remained. Tom Harris approached as Wyatt counted the money. "Good business you have there. Your workers make all this." "Yes," Wyatt replied. "They're very talented." "We still haven't met them," Tom commented. "You've had them for 3 months and no one in town has seen a face. They work hard. They don't have much free time for visiting towns." Tom nodded slowly. "The sheriff's wife bought 3 blankets. She's delighted. She says she wants to meet the artisans to thank them personally." Wyatt felt tension in his back. Maybe in the future. For now, they're busy with the next collection. That night, Wyatt slept in the small back room of the store that Samuel rented to travelers. But sleep didn't come easily. Tom's words echoed in his mind. People wanted to meet the women. It was natural, normal, but also dangerous. The next morning, he began the return trip. He carried fresh supplies and, more importantly, money. A lot of money. Enough to buy materials for more weavings, food for months, and maybe some new tools. When he arrived at the ranch on the 3rd day, the women greeted him with excitement. Wyatt unloaded the supplies and then gathered everyone in the open space in front of the barn. "I sold almost everything," he announced, emptying the money onto an improvised table. "And people want more, much more." A murmur of surprise ran through the group. Genoa translated for those who didn't understand English. "This changes things," Wyatt continued. "You're not just paying a debt anymore, you're building a business." "A future," Nayland spoke, and Genoa translated. "What do you propose?" "I propose that we become partners. You create, I sell, we split the profits. This ranch can be more than just a hideout. It can be a home, a real business." The women looked at each other. There were quick conversations in their language, debates, questions. Finally, Nayland spoke again. Genoa translated with a smile. "She accepts, but with one condition, that we stop calling it your ranch. From now on, it is our ranch." Wyatt felt something warm in his chest. He extended his hand to Nayland. "Deal." Nayland took his hand firmly. The other 24 women approached, forming a circle around them, their hands joining in the center. A month later, the ranch was unrecognizable. They had built a separate workshop for weaving, with good light and space for several women to work simultaneously. The garden had expanded to twice its original size. They had even started raising chickens in a new coop built behind the barn. Wyatt had made 3 more trips to town, each time selling more pieces. The demand was incredible. Merchants from neighboring towns began to appear wanting to buy wholesale, but with success came new challenges. One day, the sheriff of the town showed up without warning. Wyatt saw him approaching and his heart sped up. "Sheriff," Wyatt greeted as the man dismounted. "What brings you out here?" "Curiosity," replied the sheriff, an older man named Dawson with gray hair and shrewd eyes. "My wife won't stop talking about these blankets. She says they're the most beautiful things she's ever seen. I wanted to meet the artisans." "They're working," Wyatt said quickly. "I won't bother them," Dawson said, walking toward the workshop. "Just a quick hello." Wyatt had no choice but to follow him. When they entered the workshop, 5 women looked up from their work. Nayland was among them, her hands moving skillfully over a loom. The sheriff stopped dead. His eyes widened as he immediately recognized what he was seeing. "They're Apache," he said simply. Wyatt didn't respond. There was no point in denying the obvious. The sheriff looked at the women, then the workshop, then back at Wyatt. "How many?" 25. The sheriff whistled softly. "The women who escaped, the ones the tribe was looking for months ago. They chose to be here," Wyatt said firmly. "They're not prisoners, they're partners." The sheriff was silent for a long time. He walked around the workshop, examining the work, watching as the women continued weaving without showing fear. "Are they causing you any trouble?" he asked finally. "None, just hard work and good results. The well is fine, never dropped more than normal." Dawson nodded slowly. He approached Nayland, who looked him directly in the eyes without lowering her gaze. "Are you here of your own free will?" the sheriff asked. Chenoa, who had entered behind them, translated. Nayland responded with clear, firm words. "She says yes," Chenoa translated. "She says this is her home now, that they are building something new here, something better." The sheriff studied her face, then looked at the other women. "Do they all feel the same?" The 25 nodded in unison. Dawson scratched his chin. "This is going to cause talk in town. You know how people are, some won't be happy." "And you?" Wyatt asked. The sheriff looked around one more time. The thriving ranch, the women working peacefully, the clear evidence of successful cooperation. "I say if no one is being hurt, if everyone is here by choice, and if you're contributing positively." He paused. "Then it's not the sheriff's business." Wyatt felt relief flood his body. But Dawson continued. "You need to make this official. Register the business, pay taxes, do everything legally." "Understood," Wyatt replied. The sheriff mounted his horse. Before leaving, he looked at Wyatt one last time. "My wife wants another blanket, the blue one with the star patterns. Can you get it?" Wyatt almost smiled. "You'll have it next week." When the sheriff left, the women came out of the workshop. They surrounded Wyatt, all talking at once in a mix of Apache and Spanish. Nayland spoke, and Chenoa translated with tears in her eyes. "She says we finally have permission to exist, to be ourselves, to build our future." That night they celebrated. The women prepared a special meal with vegetables from the garden. Wyatt contributed meat he had bought in town. They all sat together under the desert stars, eating, laughing, sharing stories. Wyatt looked around the circle of faces illuminated by the firelight. 6 months ago he was alone. Now he had a family, a strange, unconventional, but real family. Nayland raised her cup in a toast. She spoke words in Apache, then Chenoa translated. "To new beginnings, to second chances, to the family we choose, not the one imposed on us." Everyone raised their cups. "To family," Wyatt repeated. And beneath the vast desert sky, 26 people from 2 different worlds celebrated the future they had built together.